So I'm very excited about what's going to be happening. You're going to hear tonight from a gentleman who has a great bead on what we can do as a society through educational processes to make life what it should be better for everybody. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce one of the co-founders of this conference, also the chair of the Department of Professional and Secondary Education, he's a mild-mannered, sort of leans toward capitalism, but, oh wait, you all know John, don't you? Okay, let me introduce John Elmore, and thank all of you, John and the rest of you who put this together. We really appreciate it. Dr. Michael Apple, thank you for being here.
In fact, I was just thinking about it as I was putting this together. A few things to say is that how crazy time is, and that's one of the side effects that they don't tell you when you're younger is how it's going to speed up the longer you're in it. So it's crazy that I feel like it was just yesterday we were going to get the first plans for this conference, and now here we are having our fifth edition of it. But doesn't always seem real. Like anyone who's ever organized one of these conferences, obviously small, large, middle, whatever, there's always more work than you anticipate, and it always sneaks up on you. You never have as much time to get things done as you'd hoped you would. There's always plenty of problems to solve, and red tape to cut through, and of course I have my annual battle with Aramark, the anointed god of all food and food-like substances of Westchester University. So I always go through these things, and I go through this process, and Rob and others hear me grumble and say, I'm not doing this anymore, this is too much work. But then the conference happens, and I see the way people come together and have really important conversations, and they leave here inspired, ready to go out and find ways to use education as a tool to advance our democracy and freedom and justice and equality and those type of things. And suddenly, 10 minutes later, we're saying, well, next year we're going to do this, and next year we're going to do that. So that just seems to be the way it works. So, but it's in spite of all that work, as I said, there's lots of reasons why it ends up being worthwhile, but one of them is, to be quite honest, a selfish reason. And that is that the opportunity that this conference has given me to meet a lot of my personal heroes. Now, I use that term in the most nerdy academic way I possibly could. Michael Apple does not have a cape with him tonight, but a hero nonetheless. And that is that for me, to the type of people that served when I was a student, a grad student especially, is my petri dish and my sounding board to figure out my own ideas about education and challenge them and change them and adjust them as I've gone along. And to go back and read those same books as I've moved through my career has been really important for me. So Michael Apple was certainly one of those people for me. And I think I first read Power in Education when I was in graduate school. And that, in combination with the book called Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks, and I can't remember which one I read first, but the combination of those really became my gateway drug to critical pedagogy, and an important one for me, to say the least. So let me share a few things here about my first dealer, Michael Apple. And this, I chose just to share something from an interview that he gave recently, because I thought it summed up a lot of what he's done better than I possibly could. Currently, Michael Apple is the John Noscombe Professor of Curriculum Instruction and Educational Policy Studies in the Departments of Curriculum Instruction and Educational Policy Studies at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in the School of Education. He's taught there since 1970. He is, without a doubt, one of the foremost educational theorists in the world and a public intellectual who is deeply committed to empowerment and the transformation of people through education. Professor Apple specializes in understanding and analyzing the relations between education and power, He has made major contributions to the fields of cultural politics, curriculum theory, and research, and critical teaching. He has been a tireless advocate and activist theorist for development of democratic schools for over 4 decades. He began his teaching nearby here in elementary and secondary schools in New Jersey, where he grew up and eventually served as a president of the local teachers union. He has spent his career working with educators, unions, dissident and disadvantaged groups throughout the world on democratizing educational policy and practice. Professor Appel's research centers on the limits and possibilities of critical educational policy and practice in a time of conservative restoration. Michael received his BA in education from Glassboro State College in New Jersey, an MA in curriculum and philosophy, and an EDD in curriculum and teaching at Columbia University. He is the recipient of many awards and honors, including honorary doctorates from McGill University in Canada, University of Rosario in Argentina, and the Institute of Education in London, where he is a World Scholar. He has also received the Medal for Distinguished Academic Achievement from the University of California. He's the author of many works, a couple that I've already mentioned, but they include Can Education Change Society?, Education and Power, which is now in its 3rd edition, Global Crisis, Social Justice and Education, Educating the Right Way, Market Standards, God and Inequality, Official Knowledge, Democratic Knowledge in a Conservative Age. That's just to name a few. A long list of things that this fellow has been writing over the years. So we're truly honored to have him here with us tonight. So please help me in welcoming Michael Appel.
I was hoping John would continue this. It's the first time I've been called a drug dealer in a while. There are nickel bags over there. They're on sale, just in case what I feel will happen on Tuesday does happen. I will be glad to share whatever stash I have, and we can all either move to Canada or look out for the NRA as it enters our building. That is, you'll forgive the bad humor, but if we can't laugh at what the hell is happening, we're not paying attention, okay? All right. You'll forgive bad humor in another way. As John mentioned, I spent a lot of years, I'm from Paterson, New Jersey originally, and I spent a lot of time teaching in Paterson, and I went to night school there, and then finished up at a place that is now called Rowan, while I was teaching in Pitman, New Jersey. I was president of the teachers union there and in Paterson. But my first 3 years was as a substitute teacher, which meant that I called up every morning at 6:15 in the morning, and then the local, whoever it was, would tell me what school to go to. So it was a new school every day, by and large, and if your last name is Appel, you better have a really juvenile sense of humor or you will not survive. So I would go in every day, anything from girls phys ed to calculus at a Votech High School to kindergarten, where I taught for 6 months, the most thrilling time of my entire life. Having 46 kids all try to sit on your lap at the same time is an interesting experience. But because of that, you develop a particular teaching style, which is to be serious, but also the kids will be off the light fixtures in about 3 days after you introduce yourself. But I don't want my humor, which will come occasionally, if you want it to stop, then laugh. Okay? Otherwise, I will keep trying. I assure you that is not what you want. But it is part of my style. But do not misinterpret what I'm saying. What I wish to say tonight is deeply, deeply serious. So I'm going to divide my talk into 2 sections. Oddly enough, called number 1 and number 2. But I want to sort of detail why we are losing and what is happening. The first stage in any task of interruption is to be honest about what the hell is going on. We are losing, and I want us to be honest. And by we, that is the most dangerous word in the English language. Some of us ain't losing half as much as people of color and others. Okay? And you'll see the second part, I'm going to be criticizing a bit of the left as well. I think that we are pushing people away. I think that part of the left is a performance of whiteness, and I find that deeply offensive, not only professionally, but I'm the father of an African-American kid. And that means that this is not simply an abstract issue to me. It's a kid who was in juvenile detention, a kid who was jailed, who's now the director of construction of Argonne Laboratory at the University of Chicago. And even though he had two parents who are both professors, it made no damn difference whatsoever. So I'm going to talk pretty honestly about what I think our possibilities are, but also what the errors are that we have made, and who the we is. Okay? I will try and offend everyone at least once. If I have not, would you let me know? I get better at it as time goes on. At around midnight, I'll stop, but don't worry. I've ordered pizza for everyone, but I'll ask you to pay for it. One last thing, my lecture is brought to you by the Koch brothers. Okay. So the first part of the lecture will be to sort of detail what is going on about what I call conservative modernization. Well, it's not all capital all the time. It's a much more complicated alliance that has to do with race and gender as well as class. And I want to ask a particular question. Can education assist in social transformation? And I am not satisfied with the usual answers. I think it's possible through hard work, but it will require some sacrifices and some serious stuff, including some serious analysis of real politics. And then I'm going to ask, what's our role as teachers, as researchers, as academics, as folks who are in education? What can we do and what should we do? All right? Because I am not satisfied, for those of you who know me, I'm not satisfied with simply writing about this stuff. I just got back from Brazil. We were gaily arrested again. That's sort of fun. No, it isn't, I assure you. Okay. So I will try and point to actions that I think are crucial, but also actions that I think teachers can do. I am very offended, deeply so, by people who believe that any teacher who asks the question, what do I do on Monday, doesn't understand the reality of schools. If that's the only question you ask, it's really dangerous. We should ask why we are doing this. But unfortunately, or fortunately, there are people in this audience who will be or are now having to face what it's like to be in a situation where money is being stolen to being given to the prison industry, where class sizes are rising. So in Detroit, the estimation is that there'll be 56 kids in some classrooms in elementary school as well as secondary school. And so I think we have to understand that trying to answer the question, what should we do, is not a stupid question. But it's not what I should do, it's what we should do at the same time. Have I offended enough people already? I'm sorry if I haven't, I'll keep trying. Okay, so there's two questions that are going to guide my talk. Can education assist in social transformation, and what are our roles? So in order to do that, I want us to use two concepts. First, I want to call relational analysis. The other I want to call repositioning. Relational analysis may sound theoretical, but it's actually quite practical. It says this: when you look at something, see its connections between it and the sets of social relations that made it. So here's my notes for my talk. There's a lot of pages here. You're in for a lot of time. But there's only 2 words on this one. So all right. So when I went to make the notes for my talk here, I walked up the stairs to my building, the teacher education building at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I opened the door. I turned on the lights. Lights went on. I turned on the computer. The computer went on. I began to type. It's a set of physical actions. That's useless to talk about it that way. Michael Apple, yes, walked in the building, walked up the stairs, walked into my office, turned on the light, turned on the computer, and I began to type. And in the city of Madison, we burn coal to produce electricity. And in order for me to even give a progressive lecture to a really good audience of deeply dedicated folks, I just had an anonymous relationship with the miners who dug that coal to burn to make it possible for me to be here. Whether I like it or not, even my progressive stuff depends on 350 miners dying or being hospitalized every year for Michael Apple to do my work. So we think about the relations. That's the reality that goes with this. The second is what is called repositioning. Try out different glasses. So Michael Apple is a nice white, formerly working class, straight guy. That means I'm privileged in particular ways, whether I like it or not. That means I am not in danger in the dark when I'm walking down the street, as many of the teachers who are in my curriculum development class are. When the class is over, when the lights have to go on and it's dark, and the university is trying to save money by dimming the lights so the electrical bill is not quite as heavy as people walk the 7 blocks to the bus stop after my class. Yet most of the women will have their cell phones out. There have been 3 violent acts in the last 2 months against women at my university, walking from my building to the bus stop about a quarter of a mile away. So women will take out their cell phones, and even if the battery has gone out, it will be like this, talking. Given that, I must begin to see the world through the eyes, not of the male body in the privileged space, but as what it's like in terms of the politics of spatial understandings in a time when capital is destroying university budgets. Am I clear about that? Okay. I am straight. That means I must see the world not as my uncle, who when he walks down the streets in Philadelphia, suffers massively by the comments because he seems so stereotypically, in quotes, gay, whatever those words mean. And by being someone who is now middle class, I have to constantly remember not just the memory of, but what my body is like. What it means to be the fact that when I'm here, I don't bleed. When I sit in a seminar when I was a graduate student and everyone who'd gone to Harvard is in there, it's just lit up. The CIA is monitoring you and will give your emails to the
Russians.
Alec is just monitoring this. Will you please smile for the camera? So I must remember, when I was in graduate school, everyone who went to an elite university walked into my seminars and sat like this. My body doesn't do that. It just doesn't. Okay? So I have to remember who I am. And it means that the glasses that I put on, no matter what my class position now, I also have to remember to commit a bit of suicide politically, no matter what my position is, to look at the world through the eyes of what it's like to be a poor kid of color in a defunded institution, knowing that everything is going to cost me my life. Right? So, that's the glasses I want us to put on. Now, we are facing a loss of collective memory about these glasses. I want to spend some time now talking about the right and what it's doing. And you'll forgive me saying this. I don't know whether I want you to forgive on this. But the right has understood Gramsci better than the left. The right understands politics better than the left. And unfortunately, it has pushed its agenda in quite successful ways. As an example, faculty with student assistance. It's one of the reasons I love coming to Westchester. Have just gone on strike and said, let me speak academically. Went this to the budget people. Actually, it was 2 fingers.
Yeah.
And if I had more middle fingers, it might be more useful. But the reason that that is demanded and that students stood up formed solidarities with faculty and other people, the building cleaners, the security staff, the people who cook, or that nameless corporate maker of the worst food in the history of the world. The reason that that was necessary is because there are certain transformations that are going on. And when I speak to friends of mine who are still teaching elementary and middle and secondary school, everyone has a story of what it's like now to be a teacher, the martyrdom and the labor. As we know, for instance, the average work week of a teacher right now, in case you don't know this, is a minimum of 58 hours a week, and it is going up. And the average amount of money the teachers are spending of their own currency is $500 a year. Welcome to the new reality. All right. Valium will be given later on. So there's a new group now that's steering education in particular directions, that is denying the collective memory that I talked about before, that is saying it's a neutral technical enterprise, we don't have to worry, everything will be fine. And there's 4 groups, and it's what I want to call conservative modernization. And they have understood Gramsci, as I mentioned, and Gramsci, a brilliant, actually disability rights activist, as well as a cultural analyst of immense brilliance, makes a distinction between 2 kinds of wars. Wars of maneuver and wars of position. You'll forgive the masculinist metaphors here, but they're his. And he says there's 2 kinds of wars that are fought over places like schools and healthcare, etc. The first he calls a war of maneuver, and it looks something like this. This is World War I. John has his army there. Michael has his army there. We've been to the NRA. We've gotten our guns at Walmart because we want to help the American worker. That was a joke.
Yeah.
And John yells charge, and I yell charge. We're going to jump out of our trenches. Whoever the hell kills the most people wins. Okay. She says that's not the way the right operates anymore. That's not how it works. It's a war of position. And a war of position is the following. Everything counts. Sewer commissions, textbooks, teachers' lives and salaries, people's pensions, universities, roads, everything counts. And the task of dominant groups is to occupy every space possible and then coordinate the victories later on. We don't say that. We say, well, to be on the left, you have to think only about the economy. Well, I'll come back to that because I think you'll forgive me. That is stupid tactical. I've offended some other folks. Okay? All right. So one of the things that conservative movements now are doing is knowing that everything counts. They have more faith in the struggle over schools than we do. They understand perfectly well that if they can get you to agree with them, they have won civil society. So their task is to generate consent. They know that it's raining in education for everybody. And their task is to say, we want the biggest umbrella, and we're going to beckon, or to use something that George told me today, a little Althusser, and that is intercalation. They want to do this. So it's raining. There's a lot of umbrellas out here. You can go to John's umbrella, you can go to your umbrella, or you can go under the umbrella of privatization. So for everybody, it is raining in education. For parents, it is raining because they are spending even more money and they realize that there are no longer any careers, there's jobs. And capital has decided quite clearly that they can shed anybody rather quickly. So parents are scared out of their minds, and justifiably so, There is no false consciousness. Parents know what the hell is happening to their children. And if you speak to parents of color, there is no mystification whatsoever about what is going on here. Okay? For Capital, I love this. Capital says it's raining in education. I quote now, "We are pouring money into schools just like they're black holes, and PISA scores do not come out." So it's raining. For teachers, it's raining, to say the least, because of workplace conditions, salary that is being immiserated. So the starting salary in Iowa, for instance, for a teacher is under the poverty rate. And teachers are being given worksheets, if you will, that shows them how to get food stamps. That's really respectful, isn't it? Okay? So it is raining for teachers. So it is raining for everybody. It's not raining for deans because they have so much money that they can just spread around to everyone, and all of you now don't have to pay tuition because the dean has just been given a $10 bill, and it will be shared with everyone, but they'll take it back next year. Okay? So it's raining, and the task of dominant groups is to say, okay, it's raining for you, come out of the rain. So there's 4 groups who are holding this dominant umbrella. I want to talk a little bit about each one, and then shift to what can we do about it. So the first group, speaking technically, is what is called neoliberalism, not liberalism. Neoliberalism, and it says one thing, stands for one thing. What is private is necessarily good, what is public is necessarily bad. And the more we can bring in corporate sector kinds of forms into schools, the better it will be. We will make teachers compete against each other. And oddly enough, it is the left, sort of, the most moderate left, that brought some of this stuff in. An example would be, even though I cried when Barack Obama was elected, literally there were tears in my eyes. Okay? Even though I'm not a romantic, and it's one of the first time I voted in any party. And the first thing he did in education is put in performance pay for teachers. Welcome to insurance company or us. Okay? It's there to help, supposedly, and I will still back Obama with my life, but not about that. So neoliberalism wants corporate sector forms and ideological moments. And its task is to change words that we use that come from progressives and change the very meaning of those words. A good example would be democracy. So if we formed a circle and I said, let's talk about building a democratic school, we would talk about it in particular ways. Teachers have a voice, they're treated with respect. Kids have a voice. Parents have a voice, and not just parents, because kids are not just the property of their parents. They're everybody's future. So everybody has a voice. It's what in philosophy we call thick visions of democracy. And the task of dominant groups like neoliberals is to change our key words. Words that have what might be called an emotional economy. Words that when we hear, we say, yeah, democracy, that's good. Well, the task of dominant groups is to change the meaning of democracy. So democracy is consumption practices. The world is a supermarket. As long as my kid does well, based on my choices, everything will be fine. It's Adam Smith in economics without Adam Smith. Oddly enough, my favorite quote in economics is not from Karl Marx. This may make John never speak to me again. It's from Adam Smith in A Wealth of Nations on page 313, I think. Don't check me. You take out your damn cell phone now, I'm really pissed off. So don't until later then say, Apple, you were wrong. It's on page 313 in the wrong edition. So I think on page 313, he says the following. For every one rich person, we need 500 poor ones. He obviously was not very good at arithmetic. It's probably closer to 1 million. His next book was on the moral failings of capitalism, by the way, which is not a hymn. It must never leave the room that I said something nice about Adam Smith, okay? But the point is that this vision, even of the founders of economics that we use to justify all this privatization, really understood that for there to be rich people, have to be a lot of poor ones. And the task of dominant groups in education and social welfare, etc., is to keep words in circulation, words like democracy, but change their meaning. So let's pretend this bottle of water is democracy. It's thick. It comes from the Schuylkill. It's really thick. Okay. There's pieces of I don't want to know in it. So the task of dominant groups say, you really like democracy. To pour out, let me put this on, to pour out the meanings and then pour in new meanings. And the new meaning is consumption practices. Hence, charter schools, competition among teachers, etc. All right? Or tax credits. So in the state of Wisconsin and in Florida, middle-class people now get tax credits that they can pay for private tuition. And by the way, 80% of the people in the United States who are using vouchers are already in private schools. There is no benefit to poor people on this. Okay? Let's see how this works in real life, and then I'll move on. Let's pretend, I know this is a bad idea, let's pretend there are two Michael Apples up here. You can now run screaming from the room, that's all right. There's Michael Apple as I am now. Michael Apple who has a car. It starts, and in Wisconsin that's a little iffy, right? So as my new student from Singapore just realized, this is not Singapore. There's snow. He's waiting for his first snowfall. He will do snow angels, and then they will take him to the emergency room when they realize he is frozen solid to the lakefront. Okay, that was a cute line, okay. So, there's Michael Apple as I am now, and there's Michael Apple as I used to be, a kid from the slums of Patterson, where everybody, whoever had work, paid for everybody else. Okay? Let's pretend the government has convinced many, many people that vouchers and choice plans, charter schools where you have choice, are good ideas. And Michael Apple's parents, who loved Michael because I was the only child until my brother came, I threw him down the stairs a couple of times. But aside from that, I was a very lovely person. And it's true, by the way. Enough. Okay. So let's pretend that my parents, as they really were, worked in factories and they had to be there at 6:30 in the morning. Okay? And the government gives them a check of $5,000 and says, you can go to the schools with the best test scores over there. You just have to get your child there. All right? You have choice. It is democratic. Okay. Michael Apple's parents say, we love Michael. We want him to go to the best school with the best test scores in Patterson, New Jersey, or Philadelphia. But they have to be at work at 6:30 in the morning. Now it takes 3 buses to get to that site of reality, because neoliberals also have attacked the public transportation system. And in so doing, they go to the boss and say, boss, I can no longer be here at 6:30 in the morning because I love my child and I must take my child on the bus, my 8-year-old son or daughter, to that lovely school over there. And the boss will say, yes, I agree totally with you. We will be democratic. You do have choice. Your choice is either you're here at 6:30 tomorrow morning or you are gone. Okay? Scenario 1. Scenario 2, Michael Apple, now. I meet my undergraduate future teachers that I'm advisor for 40 of them once every 2 weeks at 8 in the morning before their classes start at 8:50. Now I can't do that now because I have a son called Michael Apple or a daughter called Michelle, and I'm going to take her to that best school over there, and I can get in my car and drive, and it will only take 40 minutes. So I call up the secretary with whom I work, and I say, Tom, I can't meet my students anymore at 8 in the morning. Could you reschedule for me? My dean is not going to tell Michael Apple, you're fired. Let me repeat that. My dean will never even mention. Markets and individuated choice plans in every nation they have ever been tried re-racialize, increase apartheid, transform education into, if you will, welfare for the middle classes and the affluent. There is no evidence whatsoever, internationally or nationally, to support the religious claim that markets are efficient and improve education. No evidence in the world. Am I clear? These are people calling for evidence-based practices who say we simply want to be more democratic. If you want to see the pipeline to prison recreated even worse than it is now, put markets in charge of education. Okay? All right. So this group is attacking teachers, making their lives often miserable. And they believe in what might be called a weak state. Keep that in mind, the notion of a weak state. Government responsibility should only be to cut taxes and give the taxes over to the private sector. Okay? There's a second group that we might call neoconservatives. They believe that capitalism is a good thing, but they have a cultural agenda. And that cultural agenda sounds like this. What's wrong with schools and wrong with teachers is they're not very smart, and we must return to that eloquent fiction that we all have a common culture. And if I can return to a common culture that teachers are forced to teach because of testing, everything will be fine. This is what Pierre Bourdieu calls an act of symbolic violence. There has never been a common culture in the United States. I hope there never will be. What is common is that we disagree. So let me give an example. I'm from Paterson, New Jersey. It's the home of the first communist strikes in the United States. It used to be called Silk City. It's the third poorest city in the United States of its size. Okay? So, when I went to school as a kid, 20% of the kids in my schools looked like me. 40% were Puerto Ricanos, speaking Espanol, and 40% were African American, okay? Or Afro-Caribbean. It is now the second largest Arabic-speaking city in the United States outside of Dearborn, Michigan. What is common is constantly being transformed. The United States is a vast experiment. And the question is, it's an experiment in what? And any attempt to solidify this thing called the common, when there's 152 languages spoken in the schools of Philadelphia and in the schools increasingly in Westchester and the surrounding areas, as diasporic populations make the United States a much more interesting place. If you want to be patriotic, celebrate that. And not only with Taco Tuesday, please. Right? But let's understand, this is an experiment. We are trying in the United States something that has never been tried in the history of the world on this scale. I know of nothing more challenging to future teachers and current teachers than that. What we don't want is an act of symbolic violence. Let me give an example of how this works. There is supposedly a progressive but voluntary national history curriculum in the United States as part of the Common Core. Supposedly progressive. It says this: we are all immigrants. We all have the same history. From Nigeria and Sierra Leone, same history. For indigenous groups, they walked over what was then the Ice and Land Bridge, and they walked and walked and walked and walked until they got to Wisconsin, and their feet got tired and they stopped. Some got to New York State, some got to Pennsylvania and they stopped. Some stopped in New Jersey because obviously they had no brains whatsoever, just waiting for Christie to come and say, oh my God, he's here. And some went to Georgia and some went to Oklahoma. Of course, they took a side trip from New York with a short march during the winter to move them from New York to Oklahoma. But it was a nice walk. The fact that half of them died on the way is a minor issue. And some went to Panama, and some went as far south as Chile, where they stopped because the water got cold. Okay. Let me recapture some memories here. The United States federal government gave smallpox-infected blankets from military hospitals for 117 years to indigenous people. doesn't sound like immigration to me. That sounds almost like genocide. 3 to 5 million people of African descent were stolen from the continent of Africa, a northern construction, as if all of Africa is the same. And they died. 3 to 5 million people died. Slave ships had nets. My favorite short story is Alice Walker's autobiographical story, partly about why she is a vegetarian, when she says, "We were treated like meat. I cannot eat that." That's a powerful statement that reminds in its very vocabulary this history. That is not immigration. That is enslavement. And part of our task is to turn nouns into verbs. No one was or is a slave. Someone must turn you into a less than person. And part of our task in many ways in looking at neoconservative forms that seem so progressive is to see how they turn verbs back into nouns. Right? Now, neoconservatives want a strong state, and there's this odd alliance. How can you put together people who want weak state control with people who want a strong state? Well, there's a fiction that the folks who want sort of competition want a weak state. Let me give one concrete example of this and then move on. The simplest concept in economics is what is called a zero-sum game. This is the budget of my own state. That's about the size of it right now. Thank you, Mr. Walker. You're such a lovely guy. I'll tell you what. No, I was about to say, you send me your governor and I'll send you mine. You send me to me, I'll send you Johnson. As long as you take Donald Trump and he never said no, that's the worst possible. So here's the budget. Okay? Those people who want to turn everything over to the corporate sector and that schools and teachers compete against each other are saying we will save money. So let's take the state of Wisconsin, the historic progressive state in the United States, the home of U.S. socialism. He coughed having a heart attack saying it. We now have a vast tax transfer policy. There is no weak state. It's a fiction. 1 out of every 4 African American young men and 1 out of every 7 Latinos has been or is now under the control of the injustice system. It's in prison. 1 out of every 21 African American young women has been or is now in prison. 1 out of every 17 indigenous young men has been or is in prison. That's not a weak state. That's a budget transfer program. It goes from education, teacher salaries, textbooks, health care, pensions, and education, this way to the prison system. It's $70,000 a year to keep someone in prison. It's $11,000 a year to educate a kid, which is half of what is required anyway. Okay? So this is a fiction in some ways. There's a third group called authoritarian populists. This is a group that believe that the people must decide, but there's good people and bad people. So it's authoritarian populists. These are the people who are now screaming for Trump, but who are also evangelicals. And they believe in one thing. We will save schools and make them much better if and only if we return their particular vision of a supreme being to the school. Now, the fastest growing school reform in the United States is one most of you will not see and will not teach you. It's bigger than all the vouchers, all the charter schools in the United States. It's called homeschooling. 4 million children are being homeschooled. 80% of them are doing it for religious and ultra-conservative reasons, except, for instance, for the fastest growing percentage, and that is African American and Latino parents who are saying there's cultural genocide going on in these schools. I must save my child, so I will educate them at home. Okay? I don't want to speak theoretically about this group. I want to read you a letter that has recently come out in a new iteration from this group. written by Phyllis Schlafly, who just died, a member of Concerned Women for America. She's the leader. Okay. We will all have to sign this later on. Because after all, this is schools, so there'll be an examination afterwards. Okay. So this is to the school board president. I am the parent of such and such a child who attends this school. I hereby request that my child be involved in no activities or materials listed below. Then it lists how they will sue you. So what do they not want to go on? There'll be no discussions of emotions, no discussions of attitudes, no discussions of values, no uses of moral dilemmas, no discussions of religion or moral standards, no open-ended discussions of any kind. It goes on, it gets better. No discussions of death, no discussions of abortion, euthanasia, suicide, no discussions of alcohol or drugs, no instruction in nuclear war. I did that all the time when I was teaching in New Jersey. Children, let's build a bomb! It's so much fun. No discussions of global curriculum, no discussions of interpersonal relations, no education in human sexuality, including premarital sex, extramarital sex, contraception, abortion, homosexuality, group sex, prostitution, incest, masturbation, bestiality. You know what that is? I'm waiting for an answer. If you do, you should never be a teacher. Divorce, population control, no discussion of the roles of males and females, no use of pornography, which I had up on my walls constantly. No discussions of organic evolution, no discussion, this is one of my favorites, no discussions of witchcraft, the occult, or Eastern religions. Notice the suturing together of Islam with witchcraft. That's quite serious. By the way, there's brilliant new historical research, something that I mentioned earlier to one of you, that shows that when people who were enslaved were brought to the Americas, more than 1/3 were Islamic and perfectly literate in Arabic. What does that tell us about the national narrative? When we say this is a Judeo-Christian nation, it's nice that they had something besides Christianity. But it says that the people who were giving their lives to build this nation, the fundament is also Islam. Okay? So here in this, we are suturing together particular things. Then it goes on, no discussions of politics, no discussions of income, no autobiographical assignments, no logbooks, diaries, etc. So I'm left with one question. What is left to teach? So, then there's a final group, what we might call new managerialists, and they believe one simple thing. If it moves in classrooms, measure it, and if it hasn't moved yet, measure it anyway in case it moves tomorrow. Now this is where the class analyst comes out with me. This is a group of people who would vote for Obama, who would never be seen at a political rally for the right, but they have occupied positions and we have trained them. They have degrees in accountability, assessment, testing, and they believe they are helping. And to them, it's an epistemological war. A good teacher is measured only by test scores. And they're the people who give state departments of education and give the government the tools, the cultural capital that they have traded in to get mobility within the government, and it is their policies that actually are a good deal of power, that have a good deal of power. That's very important because we could win against all of the privatizers and still come out losing. We could beat capital at its own game in many ways because our assumption is there's only one class in dominance. This is a very, very egregious error in terms of class analysis. Capital is infinitely creative, there are new class fractions, and there is no guarantee that that class in dominance in the education apparatus of the state are people who own Walmart. It is a relatively autonomous group, and I would, you're not doing teachers any favors by saying, once we have more cooperation, everything will be fine in schools. Anyone who has been in a school now knows that teachers are constantly doing this. And if you're being paid by test scores, believe me, this is a pretty compelling kind of thing. And by the way, that means that affluent schools, teachers will get even more money. All right. Okay. So, to quote someone called Michael Apple, a brilliant person. Unfortunately, I'm sober right now, so I'm a little less brilliant. You think apples are only good if you give to teachers? They also make brandy. Is that kind of... Okay, so here's a question. What can we do about this? What can critical educators do to interrupt these ideologies, these policies, these tendencies? Well, in order to do that, we have to ask, what do schools do? Here's one of my arguments against the traditional left. So I've got two legs. 1.5 of them comes from the traditional left. I'm what's called, as John knows and Rob knows, what's called a red diaper baby. So I grew up in a commie family. That's a heavy burden to carry, I assure you, because you're never always right. If you deviate at all, your grandfather tells you he's no longer your grandfather. Okay? But we've made mistakes. So the traditional narrative of what we can do is the following. Teaching is nice work if you can get it, but you can't do anything in schools unless you change the economy. That's the usual narrative. Which is the best excuse I've ever heard for not doing anything. Because I don't work in factories. Those schools are starting to look like them. Okay? I used to work in a factory, but I don't anymore. I work in a place that also has people working. So the first thing we need to remember is schools are workplaces. So even if you're a traditional, hardline person that says only work in the economy counts and we must change the economy first, the economy is the assemblage of paid and unpaid workplaces in this society, period. That means in schools, people cook the lunches. That is often minoritized women and working class women. There's school secretaries, and by and large they are usually women, working class women. There's the people who clean the buildings, and they're often paid a wage that they have to go on food stamps. And then there's the labor of teachers and counselors and crossing guards and principals. So what, are we going to ignore them? So the first step in understanding that there's stuff to do is to remember the importance of unions and struggling over not just teacher unions, but the other people who work in the building. That's an example of what I call relational analysis. I can't do my work unless the people who clean the building at the university do theirs. If they have been privatized at my own university, and that means if I'm to show solidarity, I must go out and strike with them, not only when my salary is cut. Is that clear? That's what we call repositioning. Okay? So the first thing is that schools are traditionally called workplaces. And that means traditional laborist stuff, and joining unions and working on that is absolutely central, but it also means we see ourselves in solidarity with the people who are cleaning the room afterwards. Second, schools are part of the struggle over official knowledge. Some groups' knowledge gets to be called important, and other groups' knowledge never sees the light of day. And as Nancy Fraser reminds us, it is absolutely central that we struggle over what's called the politics of representation. I'll give an example of that. Textbooks right now have these special sections at the top that say the contributions of women, the contributions of minority groups, and then there's the real Americans in the text. There's something truly bizarre about that. So part of our task in many ways is to struggle over whose knowledge is taught and who's not. Also, kids learn what we call the hidden curriculum. So you're paying attention, even though I'm going on, very soon you'll feel too long, the room is overheated, I have the water, you don't, it's my Picoian moment, I can control your bodies by showing examples of water and doing this. This is just water. You promised. You stole it tonight. I'm much better after a few shots. Okay. So kids learn to falsify behavior. They also learn how to be cooperative. So there's stuff going on there that becomes very important. Schools, crucially, though, are sites of social movement creation. You can't talk about schools and African American and Latino and indigenous experiences unless you understand that kids have parents and are part of communities. And in the United States, with even more segregation than ever before, even before when we were South Africa, we are now more segregated than before. And that means that people see this as a place that they must struggle in. And the history of African American mobilizations, churches and schools were central to this. And even if we can't change the curriculum and can't change the teaching and the conditions under which teachers work, the fact that parents and community activists struggle over that, those struggles are then transported into other parts of people's lives. So working in the school is formative because it is social movements that change schools, not educators. We participate collectively in those social movements, but we're not going to do good things only by shutting our doors, even though that's the way most teachers must survive in some very difficult places. So when I taught in Pittman, it had an active Klan chapter. I shut my door and did good stuff. Okay? But if we want social transformation, we want a combination of individual actions by real people who are deeply committed, but people who understand if it's going to last, it has to be more than that one classroom. So it's a site of developing and learning tactics. It's also a place of profit. The real persons who control U.S. schools, our real Ministry of Education, goes by the name of Pearson. So whether we like it or not, schools are part of the economy and struggling in them. But also schools are part of social experimentation. They are transformative for us as well. Anybody who teaches becomes a different person, a more ethical human being, by confronting kids who are not plastic masses of raw material that we have to respond to. They become our teachers. So schools are sites for the formation, not just out there, but of us as well. And that's absolutely crucial. I have too many memories of being with kids that I finally reached and taught how to read. And that's different than teaching at universities, actually. If you were to ask me, what's the stuff that lasts? Remember how I started out my talk? Being a kindergarten teacher for 6 months and 46 kids trying to sit on my lap while I'm reading The Velveteen Rabbit. Nothing I have ever experienced will top that. I still am now I'm probably turning red. I still get a wash of warmth over that experience. That reminded me of why I'm doing this. So we are transformative because, not just of other people, but because of ourselves. Of being teachers who are proud of our work. Who don't work for other people, we work for them. Okay, so what are we supposed to do? Let me talk about a few tasks. And these tasks are not just for teachers there in public schools, but here as well. There's 10 of them. The first is bearing witness to negativity. Telling the darn truth about what this society is like. Being honest. Describing reality critically. But also talking about the good things that need to be defended. Those go together. As John knows, and it's part of the bookmark thing, one of the quotes from me that he picked up is, there's good things going on. Why is Capitol, why are all these groups so angry at all of us in this room? Why are they so pissed off? That's an academic term. Why are they so angry if we weren't doing good things, if there hadn't been victories? And as my mother always reminded me, Michael always remembered it's better to be pissed off than pissed on. But that's a different issue. I'm starting to swear now, so you're in trouble. All right, so the first task is describing reality critically, telling the truth, taking risks to do it. And that requires some curriculum work as well. But if we just are negative, all we do is create cynicism. And the last thing that teachers need is cynicism. There's enough of that goes around. So, we want to show the spaces for action. Every school I have ever been in, there are places and sites in which people can do more interesting things. We have to show those spaces. Otherwise, what we're doing is just for people to say, what my son and both of my sons used to say is Daddy's oh shit response. They're quite profane. They're from New Jersey. It's this, oh, it's so bad, there's nothing I can do. Well, reality is contradictory. There are always spaces for action. But that means part of our task is to document those spaces, to act as the secretaries of real good stuff going on. I don't know about you, but every time I go into schools, there are times my jaw drops with people doing stuff that I said, why wasn't I doing that when I was teaching elementary and secondary schools? There's real talent out there. There's unbelievable commitment. And because of that, part of the task of people at universities is to tell the stories of what is really going on. And that requires not that people who are going to be teachers change, but what counts as tenurable stuff needs to change as well. So Wisconsin, considered one of the world's great universities, to get tenure you need to be on a cereal box. Has to say Wheaties and Michael Apple at the same time. There's something profoundly wrong with that. So we need to change what counts as good research here. At Westchester, at Wisconsin, I've given up on Penn. That will never happen, okay? They can't charge all that exorbitant tuition and have real people do the research on real institutions. I'm looking around to see if there's anyone who has relatives at Penn. Uh-oh, okay. I have to be honest, I taught at Penn one summer. One summer. It's the longest summer of my entire life. So we have to, again, act as secretaries, telling these things. So as an example, of all the books I have ever done, that was cute. Of all the books. This little book called Democratic Schools has sold 1 million copies. Now, as John and Rob know, I get no money from my books, and the money I get for this lecture goes to the same fund. So all the money goes to the Violence Against Women's shelter around the corner from my house. That's a pact that I've made with my wife. So a lot of money has gone to these mobilizations. This is real teachers where sometimes we had to go in and tape and then stick it back to them, telling their stories. It's translated into 37 languages. That's not a hymn to Michael and Jim Beam. It's a hymn to teachers who say, I want to see that this stuff can work. And too much of critical stuff, the only stuff is at the keyboard. If you're going to do critical pedagogy and write about it, the best way is to be with people doing it as a reality check, and also to be taught, and also so it is not so abstract, so that you need 2 books to understand it. The Postmodern Dictionary and the words of the author. Well, that is not to say that theoretically powerful work should not be done. It must be done. We need new words to describe new realities, and old words to be recaptured about the power of capital, as an example. But I am deeply offended, when people will say these incredible things, and when real things about schools enter into their ambit, they're treated as a form of pollution, as if it will dirty the purity of their talk. That's the worst thing that can happen. and that's an epistemological commitment as well. It's John Dewey meets Antonio Gramsci. It's, guess what, folks? The best theory is done in relationship to its object. And for us who are in education at schools and teachers and curriculum and God help us assessment, or as I prefer to talk about it, let's figure out what happened. Okay. In order to do that, we have to keep critical traditions alive. We are under attack. So it is now very, very hard, and what makes Westchester, I'm not certain you all understand this, so special in the United States. The fact that there is a program here in critical pedagogy, the fact that there are courses that people take on this. I'm at supposedly the most radical university in the United States. We don't have a program like yours. It's on critical reflection. It's supposed to be anti-racist. But it is not as powerful at times as what you're doing. So that's actually very important to understand this. There are victories here that are crucial about keeping traditions alive and using them to talk with, not only to real teachers, about real things, with projects that go on in schools at the same time. That's actually quite remarkable, and that needs to be defended with our lives, all right? And I mean that with sincerity. But we also then have to give our expertise. I am not anti-intellectual. That is, while I'm talking about an epistemology of praxis, right? We have all sacrificed to be here. Everybody in this room, and many of you are here, and you're not supposed to be here. I grew up poor. I'm not supposed to be here. Many of us come from families that we were either first generation going to school, or there's a whole tradition, but people are paying. Many of people are paying, working 2 jobs, 3 jobs. Parents and families are sacrificing to keep us here. It's either stupid that we're here and we don't know why, or we're learning some stuff that we must give back to communities. And here I must tell quite a powerful personal story. My father's name is Harry Apple. He was, before he died a few years ago, a Maoist. The last Maoist in the universe. Okay? Not many people in China would agree with that. He's a very political guy. And in the years that he was a printing teacher, even though he never went to college. Okay? And it took him 8 years to graduate secondary school. But he was a printer, as I was. Okay? And he was living in this assisted living place as dementia began to seep in. It's quite horrible when this happens. And as you walk into his little studio apartment, there's a shrine to Michael and Rena Apple with all my books and my wife's books. My wife does history of women's control of the bodies, history books. As so like a little hallway, and there's a shrine with our pictures, and there are all the books. So whoever comes to see my father, you see the books. That's my son and daughter-in-law. And I'll point them out. Well, I went through a little crisis. Educating the Right Way came out. It was given the Best Book Award by a nice organization. What do you... And I went to visit Pittman, New Jersey that year to go back to a reunion of the kids that I taught. And all kinds of memories came back of me working with kids, and the stories and the laughter was incredible. And I said to my father, Harry, and he knows it's serious now, it's not Dad, it's Harry, am I doing right? So all of this is nice. I've got an ego, thank you very much. Did I make a mistake? Was it worthwhile? When I taught Jose, one of the migrant workers' kids that I was teaching, and I'm the one in 4th grade that taught that kid how to read, it finally worked. I will never have that experience again, that I changed the kid's life visibly. Is it worthwhile? And he looked at me like this. up in my face. Michael! And he's spinning. I'm like, no, thank God I wear glasses, right? Because there's acid in his voice. Michael! You'll forgive these words, and I'm quoting my father, who never swore. When he went on a demonstration, he put on a tie, because the working class must look respectable as they're dragged off to arrest. And he looks at me and says, Michael, that is the worst fucking thing you have ever said to me in your entire life. I'm about to get a timeout. This is serious business now. And he looks at me again. I've never heard him use the F word before. It's not what he does. It's right in my face. It's really disrespectful. The whole family sacrificed to get you where you are. You're here because of us. And your task is to bring that stuff back. What have you got to teach us? Because otherwise what you said is all the sacrifices we made were worthless. What are you, some middle-class fool? Wow. That's the smartest stuff I have ever heard in my entire life. My father still had the capacity to teach me about the power of teaching. So part of our task is to quote Harry Apple without the F word. I don't think you're allowed as a teacher if you say it too often. Even in New Jersey. Well, let Christie say it as he gets the hamburger for Donald Trump. I now believe there is a God. When Chris Christie has to go get a hamburger for Donald Trump, there is someone up there saying, the world is good. Okay. A few more of this is the concluding part, the words you've been waiting for. So that will require that we also build new skills. The right is brilliant about the use of the media. They're good on Twitter, they're good on Facebook, they're good on getting stuff on Fridays when it's a bad news day to dump out all the emails that will tell you that Anthony Weiner was a fool. Right? And they know that it will get them a weekend of play before anybody can talk back. They're really, really smart about the uses of the media. So we have to develop new skills. We have to talk plain folks English, or plain folks Espanol, or plain folks African American talk. We have to develop this again. Now, I assure you, if I want to convince people to not go under the rightist umbrella, if I start quoting from Michael Apple, that's not a good idea. There's academic talk, and there's political mobilizing talk. And again, if I can't say things in ways that people understand it, if I do again need a postmodern dictionary, then I'm not a public intellectual. So what I'm talking here tonight is a little different than I would talk if I was working with a group of parents who are scared out of their mind about their kids' futures. And the right is very good in stealing that way of talking. So once again, people at the university should be listening to teachers about how you talk to PTAs, how you talk to community activists, how you talk to real people, provided that the teachers know how to do it as well. And that's not always guaranteed. A couple more. In order to do this, we have to build critically democratic communities in one's daily life. I'll give one example of that. 5 years ago, we had a vote in one of my departments to give clerical workers the right to have a symbolic vote on tenure. The reason being there have been complaints about professors who constantly, in very sexist ways, would go, this was a time when all of the secretaries were women, and many of them would let go because of neoliberal agendas, cutting the budget. So I used to have 4 secretaries that I would work with when I was chair of elementary education. Then there was one, and she was doing an unbelievable amount of work, staying until 7 o'clock at night when stuff needs to get done. And we had some lovely men who would go to them and say, "Here, honey, I need this by noon." That's not nice. Whew. Okay. If you're going to do that, honey, I should have a vote on your tenure, on your salary. Now, you may disagree with that, but it's an example I happen to believe in quite strongly. I want people who work together that have a voice in each other. Now, whether you agree with that or not, the importance of building communities that support us and that we support is crucial. And there's a story in here about Fratney Street School in Milwaukee, a two-way bilingual school that speaks specifically to holding community meetings in mosques, in churches, so largely, school largely of color, not in the school because the parents had failed in that school. They went out into the community. Okay? Those are things that become crucial. Okay, the last three. We need to practice critical curriculum and teaching in our own teaching. These are not just words, they're practices. And if we don't do it at universities, how can we expect people to do it in their own schools? They're not just discourses. And it means that we must do them. Again, that's what makes some of this stuff done here very different than the rhetorical stuff that goes on by some very, very well-known critical educators who speak a lovely language. I'll let you fill in the blanks if it makes sense. As I mentioned, I'm a little angry about what's... I spent a lot of years in Brazil with Paulo Freire. There's a lot of tapes of Michael Apple and Paulo Freire in conversation. That book will never appear because it's disrespectful. Paulo taught me a lot, and one thing he taught me is you work through dialogue, but you also practice what you preach. And if you're using this stuff for professional mobility, go someplace else, like an insurance company. Now I'm really pissed off. But as my mother said, okay, the last two. We can't do this by living on a balcony. There's no neutral space here. It's not something you put on like a mask. It's a life. And you don't do it on a balcony. It's not here. Look at all that critical pedagogic work down there. Isn't that interesting? Oh, maybe I'll videotape it. I'll play it when the Phillies game is over. This is not the space. That's the space. And unless we in many ways get down off the balcony and become members of these communities who are doing it so that they can teach us as well as us teaching them, so the we is broader and not hierarchical, but lays down like this, we will fail. These are collective responsibilities. If you need a citation on this, there's a brilliant book by Bakhtin called Rabelais and His World, and he traces out the history of the balcony, which was the way it was built during Carnival in medieval Europe, when affluence was being built by an emerging bourgeoisie, and they developed something to look at Carnival as people were transgressive in the streets for 1 month a year. And it was a little dangerous down there. People were talking back against the king and queen and elite groups. And the balcony came about so the newly affluent groups could say, smell that. Listen, isn't that remarkable what they're doing? Am I glad I'm up here? Isn't it beautiful down there? Isn't it powerful? It's nice up here. Let me stand out in front. That's not the position we should be. Finally, we need to open up spaces for those who are not here. There's a lot of people who should be engaged in this stuff, but they're in prison, they're cooled out of our institutions, they're not here. In critical pedagogic terms, absent presences are sometimes more important than presences. Who's not here must be changed. If this is kept only in a community at the university, and the university doesn't have a large group of people who should be involved, it is our responsibility to transform that. And neoliberals are cutting budgets like crazy. But I went to Patterson Eastside High School as a kid. If you ever saw the film Lean on Me, that's the school I went to and that's the school I taught in. 80% of those kids didn't graduate in 4 years, and most of them wound up in Rahway State Penitentiary. They're not here. Why am I here and they're not? We have an ethical responsibility to increase the we constantly. Now, I can't tell you what risks to take, but I can repeat what my father, the brilliant Harry Apple printer, said. It is really disrespectful, Michael, not to do what people have sacrificed for you to do. Everybody in this audience is here because generations of people have sacrificed. We're in education. We're not in training. And our task is to listen to what not Harry Apple said, but the millions of people who came before us who said, we will change education. That's our task. Thank you. By the way, you were very patient, so thank you.
Anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? Okay.
Can you talk about the role of a parent who is a critical educator making choices about their own biological children's school?
This is tough.
I know.
Because they're not. This is competing ethics. I don't want any parent to be a parent who doesn't. Can you hear me? Or should I go to the microphone? You hear in the back? Okay, I'll back the microphone. By the way, the translation of mic in Chinese is microphone. So last year I was in Beijing. I'm a professor at the University of Beijing and gave a similar lecture without the swear words. They introduced me as Microphone Apple. It's very, very cute. So, more seriously, look, we have to understand they're competing ethics. It is, parents should care deeply about their own kids. But as I mentioned earlier, children are not the possessions of parents. But that creates a dilemma. So there's an ethics about the larger society, and there's an ethics about what is best for my children. So I'll be personal here. I'm the father of Paul Dwayne Apple. He's named after Paul Robeson. So he comes from a political family, and he was a push out in secondary school. He didn't drop out, he was pushed out. And we came very, very close. The voucher folks in the state, in Wisconsin, said we want an all-male black youth academy as a charter school. And we had to face the fact that would we do that? It wasn't passed, it didn't get built. But personally, would I take my kid out of a public school, given the fact that I refused to teach at even a private university, given the fact that my child was being literally destroyed in that environment, would I put my kid in the charter school? The fact that I would even consider it shows the difficulty of that. Even someone who is as supposedly powerfully on the left as I am, when it comes to our kids and the ways in which schools function, this is never an easy decision. by and large, I would advise never to do that. That we know, for instance, that in schools that are okay, whatever that word means, that they're not destructive totally. That there are other things that parents who are critical do to compensate for the mediocrity and lack of critical stuff in schools. So my decision usually is something like this. I will have my kid go to the regular public school, whether it's neighborhood or not. I would prefer neighborhood, if in fact it is integrated. If not, I want busing of white kids to poor kids' schools, not only poor kids to white kids' schools. And then I want the parent to form an alliance with other parents, preferably cross-class and cross-race, to try and transform the curriculum in those schools and to do it well, and then to do the other stuff. So as an example, with our kids, we kept them in regular public schools, some of which were pretty mediocre, to say the least, not because teachers didn't care, but because they were being defunded in the first iteration of this crisis. And then we made certain that we would, they were listening to Pete Seeger. They were, when we went on strike, the faculty went on strike in support of the teaching assistants and building cleaners. We're all part of the alliance. My kids at the age of 5 and 6 walked the picket line with me. They loved it because they got free donuts. Okay? Oh, strike, that's good. We're going to get donuts. Can we have the chocolate ones this time? The ones with peanuts were not as nice. But I don't mean this to be cute. I think that there are ways of trying to deal with this, but it does require constant vigilance, and it requires other sacrifices. And I just think we have to be honest about that. But I think that once we give up as critical educators on the public schools, once public is taken away, it's gone. There is no path back. And we're seeing that in healthcare. We're seeing it in those nations, for instance, in England, that have had school academies now. And when a new government was instituted, Theresa May now, she wants all schools to be academies. So my worry is not so much, it sounds cruel, my worry is less your kids. Oh, forgive me for even saying that, I hope. But it is what happens if every parent who's critical makes that decision. And I can tell you right now what we know from Brazil, where no one who is middle class sends their kid to a public school. The only public schools are in the slums. That is not the story I want here. And we're seeing what is happening as schools are defunded. It's the Detroitization and the Philadelphiaization of public schools. And right now what we're seeing is a rapid growth of school choice plans, schools being seen as sites of profit, massively. So because of that, I think that we have to make a compromise, but it will require a huge amount of effort on the part of parents who say, I am deeply committed to 2 kinds of ethics and I have to act on both. So that's as honest as I can be about that. It's what I did. Now, that may not be satisfying to you, and I understand that. I'm not a genius about this. This is a dilemma. Because I do want parents to really care about their kids. And I know for a few parents who are not caring about that. But I know what the long-term implications are. And that is truly interesting.